this is Korinne, and today we're going to paint on this 8x8 canvas panel with alcohol ink. Although it comes pre-primed, I am going to add 3 coats of gesso, letting each coat dry in between, in order to have a nice smooth panel to paint on. Once the final coat of gesso is dry, I'm going to transfer an image of the bird to the canvas. You can either draw this freehand or trace it. This was a reference photo I found on Pixabay. So again, I'm going to take a coat of gesso and put a nice thin coat on here and just cover that bird up a little bit so I can preserve the image but push it into the background. Okay, the gesso is dry and we're ready to apply alcohol inks. I have my inks in my palette. They're dried out. I'm going to use blending solution, and I'm going to start with a small brush, a number 1, and just put a little bit of alcohol ink on the bird, and I'm watching really to see at this point how far it's going to spread on that canvas. So I started with Ranger Raspberry, and now I'm going to add some Ranger Ink Amethyst. And the colors of this bird in the reference photo, although I changed it to black and white so I could see the values in it, was very different from hummingbirds in North America. The photographer is in Pakistan. And so I can only imagine that they have hummingbirds with these colors there. So I'm just doing some nice short strokes. I am just kind of filling in this area. And I can pick up ink, as you just saw, and move it. I can lighten the ink and its application by just diluting it a little bit with alcohol. And so here you'll see me just adding some alcohol and breaking up that ink a little bit, and then dabbing at it with a paper napkin to lift some of it up. Now with the canvas, there's only a certain amount of lifting that we can do. Otherwise the gesso starts to come up as well. So I'll just continue to add and subtract ink. I'm going to put a little bit of this amethyst ink down underneath the bird's breast. And I'm going to start with a light coat before I add more ink. Notice my strokes are curved. I'm trying to preserve the 3D look of the bird. And here I am adding a second coat of ink and making it somewhat darker. The bird's head had some orange on it. I'm using Sunset Orange by Ranger, just to get that filled in using nice short strokes as if it's feathers. Although I want to keep this somewhat abstract, I'm not trying to paint realistic feathers in this demo. Now I'm adding a little bit of Valencia. It's a little bit richer orange from Ranger. And just lightening up that ink a little bit to go around the eye. So all I've done is dilute the ink a little bit with some alcohol. And the top of the head in the reference photo was stream. You can see I've put some stream on the top of my palette and thinned it out so I can lighten the shade of it. So when we thin out the inks with alcohol, we can change the shade and lighten it up. And now I'm adding a little bit of yellow to that and just blending it in with the orange. And coming back in with a little bit of stream to darken parts of that head up close to the beak. And blending it into that orange a little bit. I have a little bit of stream left on my brush, and I'm just going to run it around underneath, around the eye and the back of the head. There's also a little bit of orange on the bird in the area you can see me putting it in. Again, using that ink fairly dry so that it doesn't move all over the canvas. And I'll show you later how we can use ink a little bit more freely on the canvas as we go along. So I'm just trying to get some texture. I just have a damp brush moving around, getting some texture. There's some little feathers underneath. So those beautiful hummingbird wings are all tucked in. And those feathers are all tucked in. You can see I'm adding some very dark Valencia orange ink, and it makes the feathers above it look like they're standing out. I'm adding some raspberry ink to the bird's breast and just blending. I'm going to blend right into, I'm going to add another coat, darker coat, and blend right into the other areas so that we don't have a kind of a line between the two. Now there was a little bit of stream in this corner of the feathers, interestingly enough, in the reference photo. So now I'm taking a Q-tip with some alcohol and cleaning that area out, and I'm going to put a little bit of that stream in, and I will blend it a little bit, adding a little more of that purple. It's amethyst. And just getting some texture and doing some blending here with a damp brush. And you'll see me go back and forth between adding ink and moving ink around with a damp brush and removing ink by blotting it with a napkin as I go. Just working on that blending. Now I'm just adding some darker orange ink around these little feathers underneath him or her, and adding a very light orange in the middle and removing some ink on the breast here to create a light area. And I've just got a damp brush, and now I'm adding some stream that I had diluted in the top of my palette, and just getting these feathers. So now I'm going to switch to, this is a number 2 liner brush, and I have streaming directly out of my palette. It's thicker, and I'm going to add some more texture to these wings. And I'm actually coming back with an even smaller brush now and very dry stream ink and adding some more detail. I'm using some eggplant ink by Ranger to do the shadow under the bird's breast. And I'm using a little bit of denim ink to just come around and give a little more detail to these feathers. And then I'll come back in a minute. Here I am with a damp brush. I don't want them to be outlined, so I'm just smoothing out that denim ink a little bit. Coming in with a little bit of sepia ink underneath these feathers just to make them stand out a little bit more. And now I'm also going to come in with a damp brush and just smooth all of this out a little bit. I don't want quite as much detail as what's showing. And so I'm just blending and smoothing. Again, just a damp brush. So I've dried my brush off so the bristles look like nothing's coming out of them, but the bristles themselves are still damp. Just coming back around, a little bit of stream ink and finishing off the top of that head. I'm going to use a Sharpie marker to draw in this eye and also to draw in the beak. Sharpie markers are alcohol ink. So I'm going to just color in the bottom of the beak. Then I'm going to use a blending pen. Any brand of blending pen is fine. This is a Chameleon, or you could use a damp brush, and just moving some of that black ink around. I'm using a Posca pen now to fill in the eye. And so now I'm going to start the branch, and I'm using a filbert brush. You could use any kind of brush that you want. And just applying some sepia ink and creating a tree branch. Now I'm taking just a damp brush and moving that ink around that I already applied. You'll note that I'm lightening up the top of the branch, so it will have a rounded appearance. The light would be hitting the top and the bottom of the branch would be darker. So I'm trying to give it some dimension as we go along, lifting a little ink here and there. So I just tap it with a paper napkin and remove the ink. I'm going to come in with a little bit of teakwood. It's a little bit not as warm of a brown, again, a Ranger product, and just come along the bottom of this branch, put that shadow in and give it a little more dimension. Okay, I'm going to come back and finish up my bird. Just putting a little bit of gray. You can see I put a little bit of gray there, just in the corner of the eye. I'm going to put the bottom of the eye in. Just give a little dimension. And then I'm going to come in with a white Posca pen. This is acrylic paint pen. You could use snow cap mixative. And just put the little bit of whites in the eyes. I'm also using a Posca pen to draw in the feet. Again, you could use a brush with some black ink or a Sharpie. Okay, so it is time to paint the background. So I'm going to, before I do that, I'm just going to get a Q-tip with a damp with a little bit of alcohol. And again, work on this bird's chest a little bit to just lighten it up and lighten up this feather right underneath. So I can do this a little, but it's not going to totally come back to white. Okay, so now let's paint the background. And I'm using a number 6 brush, getting that wet in alcohol. And I'm going to just grab some yellow ink. So I want the light to be coming from the right-hand side. And you can see I've thinned out that ink pretty good before I put it down. It's only going to move while it's wet. And now you can see I'm going to try to move some of this ink that's dried, and it really doesn't move well. So as we're working on the canvas, we do have to keep things nice and wet. I'm going to take a number 1 brush, just a round brush, and now I'm going to put some branches in. I decided to put them in before I do the background, totally, so that they kind of melt into the background a little bit. I'm using the same method as I did for that large branch, sepia ink, and then some teakwood ink to thicken up that little branch and make it darker. And I'll keep that branch thinner as it comes up around. Not worried about having too much detail in the branches. So I'm going to start to put leaves and some abstract flowers over them. I want to kind of vignette this bird, so I'm bringing that branch up over its head. Okay, back to my big brush, and now I'm just going to get some diluted raspberry ink and start to make it look like there's some flowers in the background. And I'm doing this very loosely. I'm going to clean my brush out after I'm done. I'm going to get some flowers over his or her head. And just adding alcohol to get that ink to move. Now I'm going to come in with some botanical ink. Again, you can see it's nice and wet. I've reconstituted it in the palette, and I'm getting a nice brush full of alcohol before I come in here. I'm just going to start to fill this in. It is going to overlap some of my pink, and that's okay. It's going to push it into the background. And this is just the base coat. I have more coats to go. I'm going to be really careful coming around that bird, so my brush is drier as I'm coming around the bird, so that it doesn't blend into the bird and I don't lose what I'm painting. So here's where I'm going to be pretty careful coming around that bird. I'm going to break this up a little bit. The patch of pink was pretty big. And as I'm putting this down, I can also, as you can see, just kind of dab it with my napkin, which will eliminate any black lines from forming as the wet ink meets the dry ink. And I'll just continue to, now I'm using Mojito green, and just continue to build this background. Again, I want it to be very loose. The main focal point is the bird, and I don't want to take away from that. So I'm trying to make it look like there's layers here. Okay, I'm going to get some clean alcohol and go back to my yellow and just darken that, add some green in this corner, add a little more yellow. So the ink does kind of sink into the gesso a bit, and it will lighten, and you may have to go back and darken some areas up. Under the bird here, it should be a darker green around him, so I'm just carefully dropping a little bit of the Mojito in there, and then you can see I dabbed it with a napkin so I didn't have lines where the wet ink met the dry ink. And the bird really stands out nicely against the green, as it's on the opposite side of the color wheel from the colors of the bird. Okay, almost done. Just refining this a little bit. Adding a little more pink in here. And I'll add a little more pink throughout. Just kind of frame out where the bird is. And I could have stopped a couple layers ago, but I kind of like the layers here. I'm going to just darken that green a little bit in the other corner, just kind of vignetting this bird a bit more. And blending that yellow into the green a little bit. I'm also going to come down in the right hand corner again. I'm trying to vignette that bird and make sure all the attention and everything's pointing to the bird. Okay, so almost done. I did take a look at this and I let it sit for a little while, and I came back and you can see I added a little more pink around the right hand side of the bird, and it's all done. So I hope you've enjoyed this demo and that you try painting with alcohol inks on canvas.